You're still watching Metropole Television. My name is Simba Elijah Charles Kiaget. This is business. Now the price of tea has improved by 30% in the last 2 trading months at the Mombasa auction. The average price per kilo of tea for KTDA managed factories rose to 270 shillings between 1st July and 1st September 2020 from 202 shillings. Now the loss of 200 shillings per kilogram were last seen in 2007, caused by the global economic downturn that hit most of the tea importing countries. KTDA Sales and Marketing General Manager John Bett has attributed the increase in tea prices at the auction to higher demand than supply and low tea production, especially in India, Assam region, where the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and the rampant floods have devastated tea operations. In the months of July and August, KTDA managed tea factories produced 17 million kilograms, a 34% reduction in quantities from 27 million kilograms of made tea produced in June. Now, besides, data from the Tea Directorate indicates that tea production for July declined significantly to 35.55 million kilograms from 46.37 million kilograms in June and 47 million kilograms recorded in May. Well, this morning, to help us put this data into perspective and actually talk about the tea sector in full, this morning we are joined by John Bett, the General Manager, Sales and Marketing, Kenya Tea Development Agency. Mr. Bett, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, the first question that somebody is going to put across to you is that, well, it seems like the COVID-19 pandemic has not hit tea that much.
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, when it comes to supply situation within the country, we didn't suffer much from COVID the pandemic disruptions. Because the factories were operating more or less as normal. The supply from the regions to Mombasa, though there was those normal hiccups out of that environment, generally not much impact. But the countries that we service, and right from the port of Mombasa, I remember there was some cases that were reported, and there was for some time there was disruption in the efficiencies within the port operations. So right from there onwards to the markets that we service, there was big impact in terms of COVID pandemic effects.
Pretty much. Therefore, I mean, everybody's saying exactly how, well, you can't talk about a no effect at all. Is it possible for you to give me a general outlook locally on what the effect has been so far because of the COVID-19 pandemic?
The effects were minimal, not really significant to talk about, but because our tea is exported to the tune of 95 to 97%, we may not have had effect in terms of supply, but we get to suffer out of the demand disruptions in key markets. Key among them is Pakistan, Egypt, UK. So the effects, COVID effects in those countries disrupts the demand for our products, and thereby you saw the market absorption. That is the volume of sold teas over the available teas for sale week on week. During that period, actually there was a big disruption, and in 1 week we registered as low as 63% out of a target of 90%. So you can see there's that big impact for that period. But this has since gradually improved as COVID effects in those countries also gradually improve in terms of the mitigation measures and the impact in terms of the logistics and the movements and restraint, containment measures in those countries.
All right.
And this,
yes.
Sorry, and this has happened also at that time when production is gradually coming down from our region. I remember at that time, April, May, when the COVID pandemic effects were almost at the peak. we were offering in the market about 13 million kilos of tea. As KTDA alone, the KTDA managed factories were offering about almost 6 million, actually 6 million plus kilos of tea per week. This has since come down. The overall market in Mombasa has come down from that high of 13 million to about 8 million right now. From KTDA managed factories, it has come down from that high of almost 6 million kilos to now about slightly below 3 million kilos. So you can see, whereas the market is gradually resuming normal life, the supply from our factories and also from the entire region is also coming down. Hence, the general reaction in terms of price movement in the market.
Pretty much now for Mr. Bed. While we're still on the oversupply, now if you remember, oversupply in the global market was seen as one of the biggest challenges that saw tea farmers receive the lowest earnings ever seen in a decade before the COVID-19 pandemic. So talk to me, you're saying, well, the situation looks as if it was going to correct. But when do you expect for us again to start talking about an oversupply, which is going to make us say, well, the fortunes that we've seen so far right now were just temporal? Is the situation correct? Is the situation going to go back to the way that it was?
Thank you. The oversupply situation started way back in 2018 when generally the production environment, both locally, India and other, and even China, was quite conducive, and you saw production really shoot up to over 6 billion kilos of tea globally produced. This again is a consumption of about 5.8 billion kilos of tea. So you can see there was always about 200 million kilos surplus, which is depressing the prices across. So this COVID pandemic just came in to make our already challenging environment more difficult. But going forward, there is a predicted dry spell for the African region. The pandemic effects in India, in terms of the movement of labor and then followed by the floods, resulted in a decline production from that region. So when you put these two factors together, the expected drought within the African region and that effect from India, we may see a correction. And the prices probably from next year going onwards, we may see a slight recovery. Of course, it's dependent. Everything is dependent on the climate. Tea globally is rain-fed across the tea-producing regions. So any climatic change that disrupts that moisture levels and the temperature regimes will definitely disrupt supply patterns.
I mean, from what you stated this morning, Mr. Bed, somebody's going to look at these numbers and say, wow, I mean, well, for the very first time, they actually do look good, because if we go by the Mombasa trading, then everything does look good. So, I mean, is it possible? And I'm asking that because of exactly what you've told me right now about how we expect again the market to correct. Is there something that Kenya can do to sustain the recent upturn in earnings from the sector and also consolidate its position in the global market? Because that has to be a talking point.
Thank you. Yeah, you see, I've talked of the supply scenario that there is a correction coming down. But now we also have to do something about the demand environment, because the two have to play together to bring out a good price. So what we can do and what we are starting to do right now is product diversification. This is where now we are producing orthodox, black orthodox types of teas. We are now starting to produce green types of teas so that we diversify our market. When you look at the black CTC, we are largely dependent on about 5 markets. But if we produce these other types of teas, then we are moving away from those markets and opening up new markets. Russia, Iran, Germany, that is for black orthodox. For green tea, it's largely the North African market. Morocco is the largest importer of green tea. And we don't play in that space. So by now investing in those programs, then we'll be able to open up those new markets. So that way we'll be able to manage demand and thereby stabilize the prices.
Yes, Mr. Bet, which therefore takes me to another conversation that I wanted us to have around this area of product diversification. Yes, you've mentioned it, but When you look at our sector now, where are we when you compare us with the rest of the world in terms of product diversification?
I think we have just scratched the surface. It's now that we are starting. When you look at our production in Kenya, the year ended June 2020, we have produced over 557 million kilos of tea. When you look at the component of black orthodox in that production, it's very small. It's less than 1%. So we have just scratched that surface. For green tea, it's even much smaller, because for us, the small scale sector, it's now that we are piloting in some factories and actually setting up a specialized factory to be producing that type of tea. So I would say we're just at the beginning of that big journey.
Pretty much, Mr. Bed, which therefore also makes me ask you this question this morning. Now, we do have news that KTDA is setting up Africa's first Japanese green production factory. Now, the Kenya Tea Development Agency, all right, now says it's in the latest stages of setting up Africa's first Japanese specialty green tea production factory, a drive that will become its long-term product diversification strategy. All right, now the factory, which is going to be located at the organization's Kangaita tea farm in Kirinyaga County, will be used to pilot the processing of the specialized Japanese centured green tea, which on average fetches a higher price in the market than traditional black CTC tea. How should we receive this news this morning, especially in the sector, when KTDA is telling us how, for the very first time, we're going to go into green tea directly into the Japanese market? Is that a way that we're talking about KTDA opening further markets?
Yes, indeed. We started with black orthodox, and we're already producing a significant volume. We are now producing a target to produce about 10 million kilos of orthodox within this strategic period. And we see that figures going up, because the market reaction is quite good. So, and thereby we are just starting to produce green teas. And that project in Kangaita is going to enable us to service the green tea markets, which is growing at a very good growth rate when you look at the total tea market. The main tea markets for green tea and that type of tea that we are intending to produce in Kangaita is largely North America, that is USA, Canada, Mexico, then Europe, UK and Europe and together, and some segments of this Asia Pacific region. So you can see, whereas black CTC, we have been largely servicing Pakistan, Egypt, UK, and the UAE region. These new products will enable us now to move over to other new markets and create a foothold in those countries.
Fantastic. So for any tea farmer, therefore, reading this, sort of hearing you speak about this one in Kangaita, is it going to serve everybody who may want to go that direction? How are you going to pick the size of the size of the farmers is going to serve?
It's a journey. It's a journey, and we'll definitely be growing step by step, the way we have grown in orthodox. So we'll be gradually scaling up based on the reception that we are going to have in the market. But it's not going to be an instant remedy to the concentration risk that we have been suffering for now. But it's a beginning of a journey that we'll definitely have to put in resources, have to put in a lot of effort, and we'll definitely have to work with government to open up those markets. So it's a journey, and we are hopeful and quite optimistic that we'll see fruits in the near future.
Yes, Mr. Bet, you say that a specialty tea is the magic bullet to unlocking more markets for Kenya. Can you talk to me how big the specialized tea market is globally?
It's quite substantial. When you look at in the total tea market, about the 6 billion kilos of tea that I talked about, black CTC is about 33%, 34%. Orthodox is about 30%. So the remaining about 36% is green tea and other specialty types of teas. So you can see it's a quite substantial piece of the market. And when you look at the growth areas, Black Sea TC is not expected to grow by a big margin, probably about 3.3 to 4% max. While green tea and these other specialty products are expected to grow at an average growth rate of about 6 to 7%. So you can see this is the growth opportunity, this is a growth area. And thereby, by investing and putting our efforts in that space, then we'll be able to participate in that growth and create value for our farmers.
Fantastic. Since we're talking about value and also opening other markets and products within these markets as well, Mr. Bett, are there any strategic partnerships we do expect to see KTDA getting into that are specifically projected towards that area of the market specialization?
I think the strategic relationship is to work with government to open up those markets, because we're dealing with countries that we need to have bilateral relations. We need to overcome the tariff and non-tariff barriers in some of these countries. So working with government is number one priority. Then second one is, of course, working with the trade associations in those countries. For example, the German Tea and Infusions Association, the UK Tea and Infusions Association, and the North African Tea Association. So these are the associations that we definitely have to work very closely with, so that we open up and we get to understand each other much more.
All right, Mr. Bett, as we move forward to the clearing of our conversation this morning, talk to me therefore. I mean, yes, you've said we do expect the price to sort of stabilize and the volumes to sort of come back again after the disruption that we've seen from the COVID-19 pandemic to pretty much settle. So talk to me about your outlook for the tea sector as we clear the year and as we approach next year.
No, we are dependent on this dry spell that is expected to try and bring down the volumes. But according to FAO prediction, this low level in terms of prices is expected to subsist until about 2027. But again, these are dependent on the climatic, as I said, the production environment. Yes, we have seen about a 33 or 30% appreciation in terms of price between June and now. And we expect to plateau around that level for some time. But again, dependent on the dry spell that is predicted to come around. But when you look at the global tea business, according to FAO, these prices are expected to plateau around that level until 2027. So we have recovered, yes, we are hoping to recover more, but we are operating in that environment that the global supply, because look at it, China, for example, that was producing about 2.2 billion kilos of tea just the other day. Now it's producing about 2.6 billion kilos of tea, and that is projected to produce up to about 3 billion kilos of tea by 2027. India, that was producing about 1.2 billion kilos of tea, is already almost hitting 1.4 or 1.5 billion kilos of tea. So that supply environment is quite is what is going to keep these prices at a moderate level until 2027.
I got two issues left, Mr. Bett. We do know that we're getting ready to get into the bonus season. What do the farmers expect this year?
Yeah, already the factories are declaring the final accounts, and I know some factories have already done. We expect, based on the volume that we sold, because we had a very good crop, we received 1.45 kilos of green leaf from the farmers, which we processed to make 327 million kilos of made tea, because 1 kilo of made tea requires 4.5 kilos of green leaf. So that's why there's that conversion. And this was much higher than what we had produced the previous year, and we sold a lot of that volume. So in terms of revenue, there'll be a lot more revenue, but when you spread, of course, this revenue against the huge crop that we received, then probably the rate may be lower. But in terms of revenue, the farmers will have a bit higher revenue compared to the previous year.
Fantastic. We can't wait for those news this year once we get the full declaration from these factories. So as we clear this conversation, yes, good news from KTDA in terms of the plans that you're putting in place. But over the other side, we do know that the ministry is mulling a plan to take you back into state cooperation. Any sentiments on that? I knew that was going to be the reaction.
Yes, I think it's a discussion that is going on. We are still engaging with the government, and this is a discussion that is still in Parliament. So we have been engaging. We were in Parliament yesterday, and we'll keep engaging. And definitely, this is a farmers' organization that is 100% owned by small-scale farmers. It's a private entity. And these are the discussions now that we are bringing out so that probably we can be understood much more.
Pretty much, Mr. Bet. Guess what? Once we get that plan, we shall be calling you back again so we can talk about what it entails and what that means for KTDA as well. All right. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. You have been a fantastic guest, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. And that's how we come to the end of the show this morning.